Mehdi Hasan is a willfully blind imbecile. And the reason for that is that he refuses to see any evidence that criticizes Islam or the fact that Muslims don't assimilate. And whenever someone criticizes him, he's always quick to call them Islamophobic. He appeared on the Piers Morgan show yesterday, along with Gat Stat, where they were debating the grooming gangs exposed by people like Tommy Robinson, and he was going on his usual facade of calling everyone far right. He's still in denial, by the way. He was a massive Trump critic, and ever since Trump won, he's calling all his supporters racist and people are stupid, they don't know what they're talking about, blah 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 blah, right? So I despise Mehdi Hasan, as a matter of fact, and I would love to meet him one day and debate him and prove why he's wrong. Because you know why? I'm a quarter Pakistani myself, I'm half Iranian, quarter Turkish. I have 3 different Islamic countries in me, right? So it's not Islamophobic to criticize Islam as an ideology. I'm not saying all Muslims are bad. I have Muslim family members. I'm not criticizing all Muslims, and I'm not trying to bring down Muslims. However, you are allowed as a society to criticize Islam. And in Islam, Muhammad married a 9-year-old child. You're allowed to have sex slaves. You're allowed to beat your wife. So, grooming gangs are systemic in Islam. And you just have to look at what happens in Afghanistan and Pakistan and even Iran. What's the age of consent in Iran for marriage? 9 years old. And that's actually for majority of the Islamic countries, apart from the ones that have moved away from Islam, such as United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So let's watch the clip, and I'm going to give you a running commentary of it.
He's now posting about Islamophobia being fiction. This guy who once pretended to be a liberal has gone full hard far right.
How many white men
So he just mentioned Islamophobia being fiction. As I said, there's no irrational fear of Islam. If you actually read the Quran, read the verses, read the hadiths, and look at the life of Muhammad, you realize there is no such thing as an irrational fear of Islam. Islam is a very dangerous ideology, and it has no place in modern society. But before I continue, I just want to let everyone know, I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God. I'm not religious. I think all religions say something bad in them. People decide to ignore. Right? And I think you just have to learn from every religion and incorporate that into your life. The difference with Islam is that Islam needs to go through its own renaissance. And the problem is that people like Mehdi Hasan stop that from happening. Because whenever you try to criticize anything about Islam, they're quick to jump on the Islamophobia bandwagon.
Involved in this rape gang scandal?
That's the Home Office research, Piers. Facts don't care about your feelings.
Hang on, just for the record.
Oh my God. In 2023 in Glasgow,
what
there
percentage?
were 7 years of child
Give me
sex
a
crimes
percentage.
prosecuted. We don't have the percentages. That's the whole point.
What you're
No, we actually do have the percentage. It's overwhelmingly Muslim Pakistani men. Disproportionately, I should say.
doing is you're massively
I haven't
distorting.
finished saying what I'm
But you're
saying.
massively distorting the story, aren't you?
No, you are.
Sometimes Elon might be very blunt in the way he says what he says, but the content of what he's saying really is coming from a good place, right?
The vast majority of Muslims are peaceful.
That's not true.
Well, is it not true?
Does Islam contain endless edicts that are profoundly problematic to the kuffar? The answer is a resounding yes.
Does the Bible...
Exactly, it does, and it matters what it says in the text. So as I said, we are allowed to criticize Islam as an ideology. We're not criticizing all Muslims, we are criticizing Islam as an ideology. And
do that.
The Bible does that as well. However, you have to realize what happened throughout history. Christianity went through its own age of Renaissance and Enlightenment, and then people realized that they need to separate church from state, something that hasn't happened in Islamic societies yet.
You know what? It's interesting you bring religion in. Religion is the most absurd thing of all. Do you think Islam sanctions any of this? These people applying girls with...
Yes, it does, because Muhammad married a 9-year-old child, and we have child marriages now to this day. And in Islam, men can have 4 different wives. They can have concubines. They can have sex slaves. Muhammad famously said, if you conquer a land, the women of that land are permissible and you can use them as sex slaves. So Islam does permit this kind of behavior.
Alcohol and drugs. Last time I checked, alcohol is forbidden in Islam. Even an ignorant person knows that. So any idea that this has anything to do with religion is absolutely absurd and laughable.
So the thing about that is, yes, alcohol is not allowed in Islam. However, the thing is, people use religion as a tool to hide their utterances and hide their, psychopathic, dark triad traits, right? And Islam facilitates it, of course. They might be drinking and they might be drugging, and that's not allowed in Islam, and I give them credit for that, yeah, sure. But then they use the other side of Islam, which is the grooming gangs of, oh, you're allowed to marry a 9-year-old child just because the Prophet done it. And also, this is another thing you have to realize, Muhammad himself used to drink wine. This is a fact, you can look into it. He used to drink wine himself. And the only reason why he didn't want his warriors to drink wine is because he made them lazy and drunk, and he wanted to keep his soldiers fit and strong to go and conquer lands. Look into that, Google it, I'm not lying to you.
And again, we don't define white people crimes by Christianity or Judaism. We don't talk about Hindu bankers or Jewish carjackers. I'm not sure why we're bringing religion into this. It's absolutely absurd. And last point on the victims, Piers, I just want to say this, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this point. The victims were overwhelmingly white, right? But they weren't only white. There's this new thing going on that these brown men decided to target white girls because they're seen as, outside the community and fair game. Not true. If you read Alexis Jay's report on Rotherham, then you'll see that she points out that there were a lot of young Asian girls who were also abused by these men, but who didn't come forward because of, quote unquote, the shame in their community, their parents saying they'll never get married. So there are actually a lot going on here that we've just glossed over. And Elon Musk coming in with his disinformation, his racism, his Islamophobia, championing Tommy Robinson. Surely you would condemn the championing of an Islamophobic, violent bigot like Robinson.
I have done.
And lying that he's in prison because he uncovered this. Robinson had nothing to do with this. In fact,
I
Piers,
literally have been doing that for the last week.
Piers.
So yeah, the thing regarding Tommy Robinson, he's a mixed bag, and people should realize that, I've met him, I spoke to him. I don't actually think he's a racist, but he is a mixed bag. Has a criminal record and a history. And however, I do think the reason why he's in jail is because of why he exposed the grooming gangs. They might say he's in jail because of contempt of court, but then it's something that was civil, A, and B, you don't usually see people go to jail for this type of crime in a maximum security prison in solitary confinement. So that's not usual. The reason why Tommy Robinson is in jail is because he challenged the established order, the establishment politician. They might cover it up however they want. They might say, oh, he committed contempt of court and he's a football hooligan and, he faked his passport, blah, 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 blah. But then, no person is black and white. You don't have to agree with someone 100%. People are 50 shades of grey. And Tommy Robinson was absolutely right regarding what he said about the grooming gangs 15 years ago. And the government in the UK had a systematic failure in A, trying to stop it, and B, investigating it. And recently the Labour government voted against trying to investigate it. What are they trying to hide? Why don't you want to investigate it? Again, why don't you want to do a public inquiry into it? It's a bit strange, no? If you're telling the truth, then why do you care about being questioned? So there's something definitely going on, and Keir Starmer is at the heart of this because he was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service when all of this was happening.
Good. And Piers, that Tommy Robinson almost jeopardized a trial against a bunch of brown guys in Huddersfield.
Twice.
With his contempt of court antics.
Twice. He nearly wrecked 2 trials.
He's not a champion of the victims of gangs.
No, he's not. What do you say? I'm genuinely curious what you think of this. I said on X yesterday that Tommy Robinson is, to me, is the embodiment of an Islamophobe. He's Islamophobic. And there's plenty of examples of where his rhetoric, I think, stacks up. People, including Gad Saad, who's coming after you, say there's no such thing as Islamophobia. That's the argument that they come up with, which is there is no such thing as Islamophobia.
I agree. There is no such thing as Islamophobia. Yes, there are certain groups of people that just hate Muslims, but there are a tiny minority. But if you want to talk about Islam as an ideology, then there's no such thing as Islamophobia, because all you have to do is to read the Quran and read the Hadiths. Okay? Is there such a thing as, for example, everything that has a phobia at the end is a made-up word. There's no such thing as homophobia. Yeah, there are certain groups that hate gay and lesbian people, but if you question the fact that there are not 100 different genders, then all of a sudden you're homophobic. Any time they don't like something that you don't say, they are quick to label you. Okay, so there's no such thing as Islamophobia if you actually think about what's written in the text of Islam.
That you're allowed to be as critical as you want of Islam without being accused of being an Islamophobe. What do you say to that?
Can you imagine if I came on your show and said there's no such thing as anti-Semitism, you should be able to be as critical of Judaism as you want?
Yeah, you should be critical of Judaism. There are such horrible things that's been said in the Torah. I've been critical of Judaism. I'm not an ideologue, I don't put myself in any box. I criticize bad ideas, and that's what we should do.
Absurd position to take. It's a de facto bigoted position. People say nonsense stuff. You've heard it all, Piers. Oh, it can't be a phobia. That's an irrational fear. That's not what it's like. Well, we have
It is not an irrational fear. It is a rational fear.
homophobia. We don't say we don't use it. Am I a fan of the term Islamophobia? No, but anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, all these are made up words to try and describe very real phenomenon, which is anti-Muslim bigotry, hate, discrimination, whatever you want to call it, right?
Okay, so what should we do if we want to criticize a bad idea without being called Islamophobic or homophobic or whatever? Because that's what you do. You label people that question the established authority and the established order. So what do you want to, like, what do you have to do? Like, is it Islamophobic to go through the Quran and criticize the bad ideas? Or is it homophobic to say to the LGBTQ community, no, maybe there isn't 100 different genders. And no, maybe trans women are not real women and they shouldn't be competing in female sports.
Idea, look at Elon Musk, for example. He's now posting about Islamophobia being fiction. This guy who wants
it is fiction.
Turned to be a liberal has gone full hard far right.
No, he hasn't, because I actually hold most of Elon Musk's positions. And I don't think I've changed as a person. I just think the political, dimension around me has shifted, because he went so far to the left that I have had nothing in common with the woke mind virus people. I actually think I'm a centrist. I'm a libertarian. In some aspects, I'm a conservative. In some other aspects, I'm liberal. I'm actually very liberal on social aspects. And liberal on social aspects means freedom of speech, and it means criticizing bad ideas, such as Islam. Okay, so I'm actually a liberal, but you don't believe in freedom of speech, do you, Mehdi Hasan?
Backing a party in Germany, Piers, which is aligned with neo-Nazis who've said outrageous things about Muslims and immigrants and minorities. The German intelligence community believes it's an extremist party. The German courts believe it's an extremist party. Musk is writing articles in German backing them. So this is where we are right now, where the normalization of bigotry and hate against minorities continues apace. And I think, Donald Trump winning is great to fight the woke. It's actually very worrying. We have a global far right. We have Orban. We have Trump. We have in the UK now, I was going to say Farage, but actually it's Tommy Robinson, apparently, that Elon Musk favors, who are being propped up. And they take very, very disturbing views of all this. And Piers, I just want to say this. People think, oh, Islamophobia blown out of proportion, exaggerated by Muslims. Let me just tell you this. In New Zealand, in Christchurch, you remember the 2 mosque attacks in the last Trump presidency, when a far-right attacker in New Zealand went and killed more than 50 Muslims as they prayed. Do you know what he had written on his ammunition, on his bullets? He had "For Rotherham" written on his bullets. Right? That is what happens when you politicize scandals, politicize controversies. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about this stuff. I'm on your show talking about it. I'm just saying how we talk about it is so important.
Is there also, okay, fair enough.
So how should we talk about it exactly?
Fair enough. Is there also a problem, as the likes of Tommy Robinson have been screaming about now for a long period of time, albeit in my estimation purely for his own self-gain, but is there also a genuine problem in the way that Muslims in Britain who've come into the country have assimilated into communities? We have as many Muslims in Britain, I think, as America has, even though they're 5 times the size. Are there legitimate concerns that you might have about the way Muslims have assimilated or not? Is it fair to even ask the question?
Of course it's fair to ask the question, and I've asked the question myself. I've written about multiculturalism and integration and all of these issues for over 20 years, back when I was in the UK for The Guardian, for The New Statesman. Again, it's how you do it, right? It's not my problem with The Telegraph and parts of The Times, and of course the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, is they do it in a jingoistic, belligerent, one-sided manner. I just gave you the example earlier. We talk about rape gangs. Let's talk about rape gangs. You only talk about Pakistani men. Why aren't you talking about the people in Cornwall or the West Midlands or Glasgow? That becomes a problem. I want us to be able to talk about this in a way that is fair and not discriminatory, and not tropes about, oh, brown men are coming here to rape our daughters. That kind of stuff, Piers, I think you would agree is not helpful. Are there issues with integration in places like in some northern towns? Yes. By the way, integration is a two-way street. There's been a lot of white flight from some of those areas. There's been a lot of issues with white working class communities, as you know, with those areas, with deindustrialization, with globalization. There's a lot to get through here. It's not an easy topic. And if we're going to make sweeping generalizations about Pakistani men, well, the mayor of London, just elected for a 3rd time, is the child of Pakistani immigrants. Why are we not talking about the success story that is the UK, which has a Muslim man as the first mayor of a major Europe?
The worst mayor in the history of London. He has ruined London, and he always plays identity politics, someone that always hides behind Islamophobia every time someone criticizes him.
City. Or in Scotland, where they elected a Muslim man to be the first Muslim British Pakistani descent, Hamza Yusuf, who was
Yeah, and he got kicked out, and he got into government, and he was, criticizing everyone for being white when he was elected himself. And instead of being grateful and thankful, he was accusing the whole of Scotland to be racist. These people, they suffer from a Islamized mindset, and they think that everyone's racist towards them when it's not true. We are allowed to criticize bad ideas, and Islam is one of them.
last year the first Muslim leader of a Western nation, right? There have been huge success stories that we don't talk about.
Mehdi Hasan, good to talk to you, as always. Thank you. On X the last few days. I want to start just by what Mehdi Hasan told me about Islamophobia, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're kind of the view it doesn't really exist, and that you shouldn't be silenced from criticising Islam by people shouting you're Islamophobic. Now, Mehdi Hasan, and I subscribe to this as well, I think if you launch the kind of ferocious, relentless attacks that someone like Tommy Robinson has done on Islam and Muslims in the way that he's done so many times, it's eventually pretty painfully obvious to people that you're coming at this from a bigoted position. And therefore, by the dictionary definition of Islamophobia, if it comes from a place of hate, that actually is Islamophobia, isn't it?
Thank you so much for having me back, Pierce. The devil is in the details, right? So if I were to say that Jews are inherently diseased, they are degenerates, they are evil, they're parasites, that would be anti-Semitic. If I say there are teachings in the Torah that are abhorrent given today's moral codes, that wouldn't be anti-Semitic. So if you were to...
Exactly, and that's exactly my point. You have to separate an ideology from a group of people.
Make dispositional statements about individual Muslims, that would be Muslim bigotry. But if you say anything you want about the codified content of Islam, then by definition, that cannot be Islamophobic.
Exactly, and I have made a video about that. You can watch it on the Reasoned YouTube channel. If you go on the popular section, I think it's one of the most viewed videos on the channel, and where I actually open the Quran and go through every single surah there is that's problematic and has no place in Western society. I also done a video regarding the hadiths, and I also done another older video on my own channel, which I will put at the end, which you can watch, where I break down exactly why Islam is dangerous, looking at the Quran and also looking at the life of Muhammad.
Okay, so let me play you a little mashup of examples, I would say, where Tommy Robinson has displayed Islamophobia by the criteria in the dictionary. Let's take a look.
We will unify every community against the hostility and barbarianism of Islam. I'm not racist. I despise racism. Islam is not a race. Islam is a fascist, violent ideology which
Exactly. Islam is not a race. That's what we also have to remember.
Masquerades as a religion.
Every single Muslim watching this video on YouTube, on 7/7, you got away with killing and maiming British citizens.
But we embrace migrants that come to this country and love it. The problem is Islamic migrants come to this country and declare war on it.
Now, when you hear all that, and in particular, it felt to me that what he said about 7/7, which was a bunch of extremist terrorists who happened to be Muslim committing terrorism, when you basically, at a crowd with a loud hailer in your mouth, embrace every single Muslim in the country and say you're all to blame.
Yeah, the problem is, though, people don't come out and condemn it as much as they should. Like when the whole terrorist attack happened on Israel with Hamas, majority of Muslims and majority of the Islamic countries were actually supporting terrorist groups like Hamas. When the 7/7 attacks happened, majority of Islamic community didn't come out and condemn it, even when the 9/11 happened. So there is a moral bankruptcy when it comes to Islamic communities, where they are either scared or where they are morally bankrupt, so they don't come and vehemently oppose these atrocious actions.
Being a maiming Brits, that is Islamophobic, isn't it? I mean, it has to be. Otherwise,
So
what is?
let me address this using two examples. The number one predictor of child abuse is if there is a step parent in the house. It is 100 times greater predictor than all other predictors. And yet, most step parents are perfectly lovely and kind and don't commit abuse. So understanding statistical reasoning and causal inferencing is important. So let me give a second example. Since 9/11 alone, there have been 46,000 plus terror attacks committed in roughly 70 countries by Islamic terrorists. That is an absolute fact, notwithstanding the fact that out of 2 billion Muslims, most did not commit terrorist acts. So we can point to 7/7 and say that that was driven by Islamic ideology, while also speaking from the other side of our mouths that most Muslims that we'll ever meet are peaceful. Both of those two statements are true.
But what the peaceful...
Yes, exactly. Two things can be true at the same time. And I think people have a hard time understanding this. And this goes for everything. Not just this issue, everything. Two things can be true simultaneously. So I think people need to stop being offended all the time, and we need to stop labeling each other ridiculous labels.
Muslims would say is that actually it's the twisting of the Islam ideology.
It's not. It's actually really not. If you actually read the Quran and the Hadiths, it's not twisting. It's actually very directional, and it's very militant, and it's very clear.
By extremists, that is the problem. It's not a genuine interpretation of Islam because the...
But then this is again Piers Morgan trying to play both sides. I can tell he doesn't really know much about this ideology. And then he tries to play both sides and then tries to pretend to be in the middle. And this goes for every issue he talks about. But then sometimes I think maybe you're a little bit ignorant.
The vast majority of Muslims are peaceful. So they say,
that's
look,
not true.
Well, is it not true?
Yes.
If
it isn't.
If that wasn't true,
so
then if that wasn't true, then wouldn't de facto most Muslims commit acts of terrorism?
Most Jews eat prosciutto and also eat shrimps, but they're not practicing a more gentle form of kosher law. They simply ignore the fact that kosher laws dictate that you don't eat shrimps and that you don't eat prosciutto, right? I eat prosciutto. I'm Jewish. I'm not practicing a more peaceful version of Judaism. I just ignore that which I don't wish to apply. Most Muslims don't commit those acts because they are kind and decent people who choose to ignore whichever they don't wish to follow in their texts. But does Islam contain endless quotes, endless edicts that are profoundly problematic to the kuffar? The answer is a resounding yes.
Does the Bible do that?
Yes, it does. And so does the Torah, and so does a lot of religions. But then, as I said, first of all, Islam is very militant. And second of all, it hasn't gone through its own Renaissance and Age of Enlightenment.
Yeah, of course, the Bible does that.
Right.
But
so the same. So you're saying you would have the same view of Christianity.
And in order for Islam to go through its own Renaissance and Age of Enlightenment, we need debate like this. We need to question things like this. The same thing that happened 500 years ago in Christianity and in Europe. So it was open-minded philosophers that challenged the authority of the church, and that's how they managed to separate church from state.
For example, would you?
Right. Well, if Christians were going around right now quoting passages from the New Testament and committing 46,000 plus terror attacks in nearly 70 countries since 9/11 alone, then I would say we need to worry about those texts. If they were Talmudic extremists doing that, then we would worry about that. Look, Deuteronomy has a lot of nasty things. Find the Elamites and kill them. But I don't know many guys called Mordechai Rubenstein looking for Amalekites to kill them. So, common sense matters, right? Most Muslims are lovely. I know more Muslims than most people will ever meet in their lives. None of them have ever been terrorists. This doesn't take away from the fact that there is an astounding problem with Islamic terrorism. Both those statements are true.
It is, but
Exactly, guys. So you get the gist of the story. We need to separate the ideology from the people. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.